Okay, brothers, I realize that it's a well-established Masonic protocol that Grand Masters are the last ones to speak. But my God, putting 8 hours of talking heads in front of someone like me, that's, I'm not sure that's Masonic. Yeah, right. And the other thing is that when we've had this many speeches, there is a synergism that happens at these things, and everybody who's spoken before me has taken some remarks out of my speech. So, you're going to hear some things that you've probably already heard, and then you're going to leave and said, that Davis guy would have been pretty good, but hell, he was saying stuff guys had already said. And so just want to remind you that can happen when you're the last speaker. I think my talk is it's time to cross the Rubicon and battle our 20th century ruffians. So the first question you're going to have, oh, wait a minute, David, we're in the 21st century now. You're old, we realize that. But, the point I'm going to make is that what has happened to American Freemasonry today is the result of what happened to American Freemasonry in the 20th century. And so we do have to deal with ruffians that we have had to live with for the last 80 years. And so that's kind of what that's about. But just to make sure you know about Rubicon, Rubicon was a small city, a river that divided the Roman territory of Italy from that of Gaul. Italy was controlled by a fellow named Pompey, who was a military leader in the Roman province of Italy. Gaul was, of course, controlled by Julius Caesar. Well, Pompey got nervous about Caesar's expanding his empire. So around 51 BC, during a time of peace, Pompey proposed to Caesar that since his army was no longer needed, it should be disbanded and Caesar be demoted as the governor of all the provinces outside of Gaul. Well, that would sort of be like the Grand Master of Texas telling the Grand Master of Oklahoma that he ought to give up control over his own jurisdiction since Oklahoma is only an outlying province of Texas anyway. Of course, that would never work because everybody knows you can't outlie a Texan, but I digress. Yeah, that's stuff in my part of the world, not yours. Yeah. Anyway, Caesar's response was to form an army on the banks of the Rubicon to take over the province of Italy for himself. And as the story goes, just before he ordered the Rubicon to be crossed, he realized how great an enterprise he was undertaking. And he paused and he turned to the men in his immediate vicinity and said, "And yet, friends, we are still able to turn back. But once we pass over this little bridge, there will be no business but by force of arms and dint of sword." So by crossing the river, this famous act, now enshrined in the catchphrase "to cross the Rubicon," came to stand for making a momentous decision. It means that it is a decision for which there's no turning back. Caesar gave his men a choice, and they chose to follow his leadership. His decision literally meant death or success to him and many of his men. He had an army of 5,000. He only had 10,000 ruffians to overcome the army of Pompey, and yet he was victorious. Now, I recount this story to engage your thinking about its parallel in where we are in Masonry today. When we encounter a bridge in our Masonic rituals, they all mean the same things. We are moving from one point of awareness to another. We are overcoming and transcending an old frame of mind that no longer works, and we're leaving it in the past of our experience. And we are creating another which enables us to go forward, to move, to do, to think, and act in a wiser and more enlightened way. So a number of Masonic thinkers I know and respect, and I agree with them, believe that American Freemasonry may be at a bridge or a point of crossing in this moment of our organization's history. And we're concerned that if we do not cross the Rubicon and start doing battle with ourselves, that is our organizational paradigms, which are now harming us, we may end up just a tiny cabal of old men who are about as important as a fart in a whirlwind and offer no significance to both Masonry and the outside world. So you see, our American Grand Lodges are standing at a threshold between a renaissance and the demise of our fraternity. That's why this is such a critical moment in our history. And so the first ruffian we have to encounter is that the bulk of our Masonic leaders and lodges are currently unaware of the profound significance of this moment. Yet if they would just simply take a statistical analysis, make a statistical analysis of the real condition of their grand jurisdictions, they would come to the reality that if we don't start making substantive changes soon, we will be within 15 to 20 years where the Oddfellows are today. How many Oddfellows do you know? How many lodges of Oddfellows? Do you know where these lodges are at? No. And yet there's a few Oddfellows around, and there's a few lodges around, probably in every state. But you see, we'll be where they're at today within 20 years. And that is a statistic that you can show in every grand jurisdiction because the rate of decline has been the same in every grand jurisdiction. You know, California seems like such a great state to us in Oklahoma because you've got 25,000, 29,000 Masons or something like that. But I know how many Masons you had 30 years ago, and you're dying at the same rate as we are. We just happen to be lucky today because, you know, South Pasadena Lodge is one of the best lodges in California. And if anybody's going to survive, they are. So the choices that we have to make as Grand Lodges and lodges over the next several years, and I'm talking about the years left in this decade, may determine whether or not Freemasonry will thrive or die within the next 30 years. And yet here we are, and we still have such an incredible opportunity. We live in a time where it is extraordinarily difficult for people to find authenticity in their lives. We've mentioned that in several talks today in one form or another. But you see, authenticity is always tied to perception. And the central question for our organization today is, how does Freemasonry render authenticity? Because young men entering our fraternity today, it's been said, often know far more about Masonry than we do. They've already arrived at their own conclusions that Freemasonry is a venue for truth-seeking, a vehicle for self-development, a quest for the spiritual. There are secret associations to be discovered there. Men are coming into our order with those kinds of perceptions about us. And we must ask ourselves, if the real experience they're going to find in Lodge is compatible with their expectations of us. And we all know that too often it is not. So a second ruffian is the mediocrity we have brought into the practice of our craft. And the reason we have become so passive in our approach to Masonry is because 20th century Masons were not taught the purpose of, the reason for, and the profound significance of an initiatic experience. They have not focused on how Masonry actually informs the transformation of the individual. There's not a Grand Lodge and there's not a group of Masons in the 20th century from World War II forward that's even given this any consideration at all. Now, fortunately, the Masonic Restoration Foundation movement began in the early 90s. They started waking up some American Masons about some of these problems that hadn't been thought about since the World War II era guys. And you know how long it took for the Masonic Restoration Foundation to actually be accepted at a level that now it can kind of operate as a thing in and of itself. In Masonry, the central point where authenticity enters our lexicon comes from a line in Shakespeare's play Hamlet. And I'll be darned if somebody didn't even steal this from me. There is a point in Hamlet where the character Polonius says something profoundly real. At the end of a long laundry list of advice Polonius is giving to his son Laertius, he says this, and you've all heard this, and this above all else, to thine own self be true. And it does to thence follow as night to day, that thou canst not then be false to any man. To me, this verse shouts to the very core of Masonic authenticity. Know thyself is the clarion call of Masonic teaching. And we all know that the journey through the degrees of Freemasonry represents each man's journey of his own life, wherein he's supposed to grow in the discovery of who he is, what has meaning to him, and what will bring him fulfillment. So if we can agree with this premise, then there are two dimensions of authenticity which we can communicate to our brothers. First is be true to yourself. And the second is be what you say you are to others. Now, what Masonry would not agree that this is at the heart of Masonic truth? And perhaps an important corollary here is to point out is, if you are not what you say you are, then you are fake. So how does this apply to the Lodge experience? We say we take good men and make them better. But we have to validate this claim to our new initiate. Each man has to ask himself from time to time the degree of honesty in which his lodge is embracing Freemasonry's real purpose. Here's the questions we have to all ask ourselves occasionally. Do I, as an individual, personally and sincerely believe with all my heart that how my lodge approaches the study, understanding, and practice of Masonry intellectually, spiritually, and physically is truly authentic to the Masonic heritage from whence we came? Does my perception of the true Masonry get exemplified through my lodge experience? Does it resonate in a way that Masonry's hope for my transformation feels real to me when we come together in our lodge settings month after month? Does my lodge honestly facilitate my becoming transformed by my experience as a man and a Mason? My God, those are important questions to ask. And they ought to be asked in lodges where guys can start thinking about what their answers should be. And I don't know what the answers to this kind of inquiry is for anyone but myself. And I can only be true to myself. I can only relate to what authenticity feels like to me. And I believe that the first essential to an authentic Masonic experience is to understand that our organizational purpose is to facilitate each man's journey to mature masculinity. Freemasonry is first and foremost an initiatic society with the calling to respond to a psychological need in men to be initiated into manhood. And the initiatic experience is meant to convey one most powerful idea to the person being initiated. He has left one life and is entering another. He is putting away an old life and is taking on another. Initiation is, by definition, a conferral of a different status on the individual. It is a change in his consciousness which results in some form of rebirth or renewal within the deepest aspect of his nature. In a men's house, being initiated means that the initiate is consciously aware he has entered onto a path toward mature masculinity. And this journey begins with his awareness. he has to know what doing the right thing as a man means. His perceptions and enforcement of responsibility must come from within himself. Now, mature masculinity does also have an exoteric dimension, which is equally important to authenticity. We must be consciously aware of how we represent ourselves to others. You see, truthfulness, goodness, honor, honesty, courage, purity, by whatever name we give them, our values define us because they also define for the outside world who we are. And how we integrate these ideals, these convictions and beliefs and behaviors out in the world will determine our social status. That is, whether or not we will be seen by those who know us as men of integrity, as important men, as men with whom you can rely upon, as men who distinguish themselves from the rest of the community. You see, a man's integrity is clearly within himself, to himself, and for himself what it is to others. And this is why it is so important that a man be aware of his dignity at all times. Above all else, a specific style of life should be expected from those who wish to belong to our inner circle and wear the title of Master Mason. And that style of life is founded in integrity. The function of Masonic ritual and the Masonic bonding it facilitates for us is no less than a dramatic construct for social improvement. So if you're not engaged in thinking about becoming a man of integrity or thinking about becoming a respected man, especially you young men, then this is not your journey. But if you want to be respected and you want to be a man of integrity, there's not another organization in the world that gives you a better path to that end. When a king is consecrated, a student is given a doctorate, a groom is married, a man is initiated in an apprentice, or a worshipful master is installed to preside, they acquire a social role they did not have before. In every honor which bestows upon us new status, we must leave a less worthy state and raise ourselves to a higher state of grace. The path to enlightenment, social honor, and status is always an upward way. Through our organization, we are about the business of communicating and sustaining status in the lives of our members. If we do any less, we stop short of fulfilling our promise that we improve ourselves in Masonry, because personal improvement applies moving to a higher state of personal integrity. Freemasonry exists first and foremost to transform men. And that transformation takes place because one is initiated into a fellowship of men, of the right kind of men. We have everything required to make this process work. And it's already been said today. We come from a legal founding. We have the longest history of any male society. We have a lasting legacy of worthiness. And we offer a sense of stability and moral authority that can be respected and passed along to succeeding generations. And the wonderful thing about this scenario is that all of this can occur in the sacred space of Lodge and the social space of the Lodge experience. It is not dependent upon the success of any hierarchy above it. It's all about what brand each lodge chooses to adopt for itself and the status portrayed by the men in it. Our collective purpose is to grow together, my brothers, in social honor. These are the compelling reasons for men, especially young men, to join us today. It's been said by other speakers today that most men are isolated, both individually and in groups. in occupations, and in feelings. Many of our younger men come from divorced parents. They seek a common identity with other men. They yearn to share a portion of their lives with other men. They want to learn about values. They want to know what real integrity looks like. They want to follow through on their values with personal actions so that they can become men with status. They are interested in how men are connected, how relationships can have meaning across generations. They want to know why they are here and what will bring them fulfillment. And it is this cross-section of the society of men we want to look for, cultivate, and have as brothers among us. And the lodge and the men in it have always been the receptacle in which these needs are discovered and accommodated. So the challenge of Freemasonry today is not that we don't own the right product. Our challenge is that not enough of our members are representing themselves as men with social honor who are engaged in personally participating in the teaching and mentoring of men, of making men out of guys, so that when one day they become the next generation of elders, they too will still be carrying the torch of manhood and honor to the young men joining their lodge. So you see, our job is to produce men who will have honor and integrity in their own time by the witness of our example. Our responsibility is to raise the generation of men below us in such a way that all men and women who come to know them during their lives will think to themselves or say to each other, "There goes a wonderful man." We need only to guide this collective consciousness within our lodge along a particular spiritual path that literally transforms and improves each of us. And this is the path to a Masonic Renaissance. Now, I also know what is not real to me.
Tacos are ready.
I do not believe that Masonry is being true to itself when it permits a complete stranger to enter onto the path of the ancient mysteries under the sole assumption that every seemingly good man is a fit for Freemasonry. I sometimes wonder if it is authentic for Freemasonry to be concerned about its public image when it declares to itself that its work is about the internal and not the external nature of the human condition. I do not believe that Masonry is being served when lodges simply go through the motions of being part of a fraternity in name only, without offering their members a quality fraternal experience or understanding the significance of what they have to teach or do. They create a Masonic experience, you see, that is kind of a real fake thing. In a real sense, they are offering a pretend experience. A lodge which informs every entered apprentice that through Masonry, he's to become a living, thinking actor filled with moral and intellectual light, while never creating a sacred space within its tiled setting that is so solemn, so unique, and so eccentric that its members cannot experience it anywhere else in their lives. Without performing its degree work with impeccable accuracy, clarity, and deep meaning, without regularly teaching and discussing its symbolism and allegories, without delivering lectures and sharing dialogue, which focuses on revealing the transformative nature of Masonry's intent for the man and his world, without regularly meditating together on the nature of the divine within us and how we can access this power for right purpose and action, is not being real to our fraternity's traditional vision. Again, our ruffians here is that we're only offering a real fake authenticity. Now, of course, it can be argued that what is real and authentic in my Masonic experience is not authentic for everyone. For some people, obtaining the 3 degrees and coming back for their 50-year pin is authentic. For others, coming to meetings, opening lodge, paying bills, listening to the minutes, closing, and eating stale cookies is authentic. For still others, being in a lodge that is mediocre in every feature of the experience is authentic, but it is only a real fake authenticity. This never was authentic Freemasonry. The systemic problem in our practice of Masonry is that for each of us here today, our traditions in Masonry have only been what we have experienced in our own lifetime. In reality, perhaps we were too passive in being content just to sustain a particular brand of Masonry that just happened to be offered to our World War II era men who were looking for a specific kind of Masonic experience that just happened to be their kind of experience. You know, they were looking for fraternalism. They were looking for comradeship. They were looking for stability. My God, they just came out of a world war. Can you blame them for not wanting to find that in their lives more than anything else? But the problem is we created a generation of men who saw Freemasonry as only the ritual and fellowship. They missed the intellectual pursuit, you know, that was a part of the rituals. And so it may have worked for our World War II era men, but I can tell you that 63 years of consecutive decline has surely taught us that it is not the right Masonry of our generation. Something was missing in their experience, which they passed down to my generation, which I do not want to pass down to the generation below me. Whatever their model was, it's clearly the wrong brand for today. So today and in the future, in more and more lodges, we will have to provide a place where our new brothers can have their expectations met, who can genuinely have an experience that is authentic to them because it is also authentic to Freemasonry. The bottom line of Masonic teaching is that through the journey of our degrees, we learn that the attainment of mature masculinity is work, and that divine truth cannot be understood by the human agencies of education or dogma or rational thought, or by the evidence of the senses. It has to be perceived directly. And my brothers, it enters us through the path of authentic initiation. And if such awareness and insight and understanding can happen in the lodge room, then the influence of an improved mind, a better human, can also be felt outside of it. Men come into Masonry to learn to improve themselves. And if they're coming here for any other reason, then they are failing to represent with honesty what our organizational purpose is and always was. And if you're not on the same path with our organizational purpose, then you are creating only a fake, real authenticity. And that is not good enough for men with social honor. It's just that simple. When we as Freemasons tell a man to be a man, we mean that there is a way to be a man. A man is not just a thing to be. It's also a way to be, a path to follow, and a way to walk. Being good at being a man has to mean something. A man is just not merely a man, but a man among men, in a world of men. The bottom line is that when we tell a man to be a man, we are telling him to be a man whom other men hold in high regard. A man who knows who he is because he has integrated his outer consciousness with his mature masculine soul, the divine nature of his very being. And because he has been initiated into a particular group who has a strong sense of its own identity, an identity organized around the ways of virtue, about being a good person, a good citizen, a good role model, a good father, a good member of society, the archetypal virtues directly related to manhood, then there exists a harmony that transcends all outside interests of the group. There is a mutual understanding of the value of their particular social unit. There is an understanding of what men have most often needed from each other. And that understanding is a sense of who they are, why they are here, and what they're supposed to be doing with their life that will shape their masculine psychology. My brothers, such men are indeed men among men. But there again, there are more questions we must ask ourselves. Do we follow the path of the mythic hero Hiram in our own lives? As we face our own challenges and move from one point of life to another, from child to teenager, from teen to adult, from adult to maturity, from old age to death, do we actually integrate the hero's journey into our very own? Do our own challenges open doors to knowledge and understanding? Do we prepare ourselves to face difficulties and use our experiences to become stronger and more capable men? Do we achieve wisdom, strength, and beauty? That is growth, independence, and harmony as we make our own journey. Do we become the man we want to be? Do we move from the impetuosity of youth to mature and manly judgment? Have we truly become initiated men? Are we truly worthy of discovering the secrets contained within the fraternity? The admission of each man into the Masonic order, then, is a symbolic representation of the beginning of his journey to personal and social honor, of divesting himself of the passions, prejudices, vices, and chaos of the profane world, and vesting himself with those qualities essential for living the kind of life that will distinguish him from the rest of the community. My brothers, the way of the craftsman, and I believe it was Kirk McNulty that said this, is to build a temple to God. It is his edifice of consciousness in which he is the architect, the builder, and the building stone. He begins as a rough ashlar, and in time he will square his stone. He will make it smooth, and he will place it in the temple. And when the temple is complete, God will behold God in the mirror of existence, and there will be then, as there was in the beginning, only God. Every lodge must create a brand of Freemasonry that is the real for that lodge. This is our collective fraternal engagement here. Let us always enjoy it with the deepest of fellow feeling, but let us make our lodge a good fit only for men who are like unto us. We only need to cross the Rubicon. Thank you, my brothers.
You want to take any questions? We have a few minutes for a few. Wow. Any questions? Any questions for Brother Davis? Mitch.
One of the things that I have been so grateful for at this gathering is what you just did. To hear people use the term masculinity, man, in a positive sense, that restores that term to honor, which I think is a crying need in our culture today. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll tell you what, I know I don't have many more years to live, but I am still trying to convince the media world to start looking at men in the way that they should have been always looking at men. You know, we are, my God, after all, a gender, and we have specific differences from the other gender. And, you know, when you go into a bookstore, there's absolutely shelf after shelf after shelf of books about women's issues. And when you start going to, and when you try to find men's studies, you've got to go to the gay guy section. I mean, that's the only thing that's being written. You know, if you were a gay guy, I'm sure that's really, really important. And I don't have any problem with that at all. But my gosh, you know, I don't want to go read a book about toxic masculinity. It's not what I'm about. And it's not what mainline American males are about. And they've never been about that. You know, we're picking up today on the fringe of our society in almost every aspect of our lives. They have been given a voice and they're taking advantage of it, while the rest of us, you know, are living quite healthy, normal, you know, judgment-centered, you know, lives, good judgment-centered lives. You know, nobody's talking to us. Yes, yes.
I really appreciate this conversation. It's all that is to have a discussion about what healthy, mature masculinity is. When so much of what we see in popular culture, whether it's in movies or shows or masculinity, is really focused on the dysfunctional version.
Yeah.
One of the things that I appreciate about this message that we often lose is how our presence in society is a mirror for what's happening internally. And of course, that reflection can be distorted by the culture around us. We don't always get a pure reflection. But it's important to understand that there is a connection between us as individual men and our communities. And part of the dysfunctional version of masculinity says, no, it's just me alone.
Yeah.
Community doesn't have anything valuable to say about who I am, doesn't offer me any kind of insight about who I am. I just want to hear more reflection from you about that future change between who I think I am, who I'm trying to be, and my presence.
Absolutely. You know, I realize that I chartered and I belong to a traditional lodge, and it's my very favorite lodge. But I belong to 4 lodges in Oklahoma, and the other 3 lodges are very much like the typical lodges, I'm sure, in California, any other grand jurisdiction. We have to understand that the general public will never understand what we are. They can only perceive who we are by what we do. So it's very, very important that we have a good public image. And the only way we're going to have a good public image is be out in the public. And it doesn't matter if we're out in the public doing good work as a lodge or as shrine masons or, you know, any body of masonry, or we're out making contributions in the name of good partners in our towns and stuff like that. You know, or if we're out there as individuals doing those things, we are creating a public image. And so we need to make sure, again, if we're going to be out there and we know that we're the only ones that can give them a public image because they're not initiated people, you know, the only thing they can do is look at us. And if we represent ourselves as men of respect, then they will see us as respectable men. I mean, I tell you, I've played that game a long time. I mean, my first profession was city management, an incredible servant leadership role. I was in that profession for 14 years. And I just got asked to become this executive secretary of the Guthrie Scottish Rite Bodies. Had to take a pretty good cut in pay to do that. But I thought, my God, I get to spend the rest of my life spending all day studying Freemasonry. Yeah, how cool is that? You know, everybody thinks I'm a Masonic scholar and I'm more intelligent than a lot of other guys. No, no, no. You have to understand, I just spend 8 hours a day studying Freemasonry, just like you spend 8 hours a day studying your own occupation to be as good as you can be at it. And so that was what it was like for me. But when I moved from this small metropolitan area in north central Oklahoma and came to Central Oklahoma, where town of Guthrie is, one of the first things I did is got on the city council. Because I understood that if people are going to have attitudes about you, they've got to first know you. You got to be out there being involved in order to become known. And as long as you always understand, I'm out there because I'm a respected man. I'm a man of integrity, and I'm going to make sure if they don't pick up anything else up about me, they're going to pick that up, because I'm also a Freemason, and they're going to eventually find that out. And so Freemasonry is going to become a mirror of who I am to them. That's how it works. Yes.
First, I want to comment on what you started out by saying about wrong place and whether you been in exactly the right that you have synthesized what's been going on in the entire time. And of course, Bob, you've been at this longer and at a higher level than most of us have. I think that your message is very important. And I'd like to underline 2 points that you made. One of them was about most recent talk I gave was on guarding the West Gate, and being really engaged with men for several months after lodge before you handle them, and that they know you were there, they know what they're getting into, it's the right lodge. And specific thing that wasn't in your talk, but I know that the generality that represents is I talked about seeing a lot of times a person would come into the lodge before they're known to anybody hardly. They're given a position. They brought in, they don't know the lodge doesn't know them. And I read the paragraph that goes above the signature lines on the petition, and it says that you have very good personal reason to recommend this man to the lodge, and it also says that you're going to make a commitment to that man to be a mentor. They don't use the word mentor, but the wording, if you read it, that's what it's talking about. If you bring a guy into your lodge, you should be committed to mentoring that person. And I think that the role of being a mentor, we have got to take on as soon as we come. And we've got to be doing that for the guys that we're with. And as far as the thing about men's studies, and you and I were talking about this earlier, and I think women are much more naturally affectionate people because of the very fact that they create life in their own bodies, and that they have that mother kind of thing. And I think that there's a lot of and you think about most of the men's studies you see have a lot to do with LGBT. There's a lot of ground they've got to be making up because they're very way alike as criminalized. But I think a lot of men are very hesitant to be affectionate with others because we think of affection as having to do with sexuality, and it doesn't. Reading your book, that's all throughout it. We've got to get into being genuinely affectionate with our brothers without having any of that kind of temper. And personally, I find a great deal of inspiration from your talk today and from your songs.
Well, thank you, Gerald. I actually was hoping that I I brought a list of 21 20th century ruffians that we need to overcome in order to see the Masonic Renaissance. And what I really wanted to do is just throw that question out to you guys and see what your answers would be and see how many more ruffians that I could take back to Oklahoma with me, because we got to work on the ruffians. And I'm sorry that didn't happen. Maybe when we do the manhood panel tomorrow, we'll have an opportunity to do that. That would be fun. But you're right, Gerald. I mean, it's just, manhood does not come from our mothers. I mean, we can be nurtured, we can be comforted, we can be educated, we can be nursed by our mothers, but mothers cannot teach us how to be men. This is the role that only men can play for men.
And we're used to loving our sons.
Well,
We got to realize every man that we bring into our lives is a son.
sure. Yeah. I've said this so many times around Chuck Dunning that I'm sorry, Chuck, I'm going to repeat it, but there's fundamental differences between the male and female sex. Women go through a menses cycle when they're approaching, maturity. And it's a powerful and dramatic moment in their life. But even more significant than that, their body physically changes. So the whole world knows that they've become women. They take on an accountability and a responsibility that's inherent with their nature, because they know with their maturity, they can now get pregnant. They can have a child. They have to think about these things. Do you think men pay any attention to that kind of stuff at all? No. There is no defining moment in a young man's life when he knows he's a man. And that's the fundamental difference between the genders. Now, he can have a lot of different initiations. Now, I'm sure if he's gone through a war and he's gone through the military, he's been initiated. I mean, there's a lot of different types of initiations. But the fact is, men have to be initiated into manhood. And that's something that's distinct with our gender. And we should never forget the significance of that. It's just one of those sexual paradoxes that exists between men and women.